Welcome everyone. Today we have Maaret, who is an engineering manager at F-Secure. I know her, and you probably do as well, from her constant writing on her blog, Visible Quality. You might have also seen some of the writing she does on Medium or read one of her two books, Mob Programming Guidebook or Exploratory Testing. Both are available on LeanPub, and I highly recommend them. She does a lot of writing, and it's great. You probably actually need some type of bookmarking tool because a lot of it comes very, very quickly, but it's all great stuff. Maaret is also the organizer for the European Testing Conference. She is on the leadership team at Speak Easy, where they help mentor others to put them into a position where they can become speakers at conferences. She has been a tester for 25 years, and today she's going to be giving us a presentation on teaching and coaching exploratory testing. So, Maaret, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thanks. So you probably see my screen right now?
That's right.
All right. So I was thinking of what do I want to share with all of you, and I thought that one of the things that I really want to spend some time on speaking and showing to you is that for the last about couple of years probably, but intensively the last 6 months, I've been spending some time working with random people, usually through Twitter, volunteering to do exercises with me. So teaching and coaching exploratory testing, and I wanted to show you one of those kind of exercises and one of the things that I've been doing with a lot of people, hopefully giving you some ideas then on how would you be testing certain types of things. So it really all starts with this idea of a question that we ask ourselves a lot as testers. Whatever we end up with, whatever feature it is, whatever product we're looking at, whatever API we're looking at, whatever piece of code we're looking at, we're always ending up asking, how would you test this? And would the way you test it be any different than somebody else's? How do you know if you're any good at testing? That's basically a thing that at least I keep asking myself kind of constantly. I've been doing this enough for last 25 years so that I have these little stories where I go and take somebody else's program. A couple of years ago, I took a program called Approval Tests. It's an API for testing purposes. And I talked to the developer of that open source project, and I told him that, you know, I want to just test that approval testing, and that, you know, it seems like a target that would be good to show how to do certain exploratory testing things on, where there isn't a GUI, but there's an API that I could just explore. And the developer was kind of, well, a typical developer in many ways. He's like, yeah, sure, go for it. Like, you know, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And also he's like, yeah, sure, like, you know, it's all written test first, and it's code that I'm very proud of, and there's a lot of tests, so, you know, you won't be probably finding anything. And then later on, this particular developer, he went on a podcast where all of this quote comes from. And quoting him, I destroyed his thing in like an hour and a half. But as a tester, I of course need to correct people a lot. I didn't actually break anything that wasn't already broken. The only thing that I might have broken is his illusion that doing something test first, doing something in the best way possible from one person's or even a pair's perspective, that there would still not be something else that I could contribute. So I basically showed him that he needs to change the whole API. It wasn't discoverable. I showed him things around environment, like if you had a couple of different test runners in the same environment, you couldn't even install the whole thing. And I found all sorts of promises and things that were kind of said and given as things that you could do, but you couldn't. And maybe the most annoying thing was that there were a lot of code samples I could start testing with. and none of them were copy pastable. So also the basic getting started with documentation was something that I needed to show, that the modern ways of thinking about what you can do with that kind of things is something that wasn't available for that particular project back when I was testing it. So I end up testing all sorts of software, and always the question that I come to is how would I test this? So what I wanted to do today is, instead of showing you a dozen slides, I wanted to show you one real thing that we could be testing, and kind of ask you, I can't get you to tell me right now, but ask you to think about it. How would you personally be testing the thing that I'm showing you, the thing that I'm testing, and how would the way you test this be different from whatever I'm showing? So the target of our testing and the example today, I really encourage you to do this with, for example, your teams, yourself in your offices, because it's a publicly available piece of code. It's called Gilded Rose. And it's used a lot in the refactoring crafter community side as an exercise where you first need to clean up the code and then you can add more features. But what I use it for basically is, it doesn't have any tests, so we need to be testing that. We need to be understanding, what does testing look like for this little piece of code. Gilded Rose was created by Emily Bach. She is a developer from Sweden, and Gilded Rose is nowadays available in 32 languages. The language we're going to be working on today is Java, just because I happen to have that environment here on my machine already and running. And Gilded Rose is a nice example in the sense that it comes with a requirement specification. It comes with the executable code, and that's pretty much a better way of getting started with something new that you need to test than what you usually have in many projects, where you kind of first need to go around and ask a lot of questions. So let's look at the specification first. So the specification, I put it on 2 slides here, and the gray text here basically says that you don't really need to read that stuff. It's just some extra text that was added there. So Gilded Rose is a shop. It's a shop in a prime location in a prominent city. It is something that is running in production, so-called legacy code. It's working for someone right now, and it is a shop where there's certain things that are being sold there, and they are constantly degrading in quality as the sell-by date approaches. So conceptually, very much a regular type of a shop. They have this Gilded Rose system in place, which updates the inventory, and somebody developed it. But basically what it does is that all of the items, there's a selling value, how long until the selling date. They all have a quality value, how valuable it is, and this quality value goes down over time. And in the end of each day, you can kind of like say, hey, time to go for the next day. It lowers values both for the quality and for selling. So this is the first part of the specification. So here we have that piece of code. Sorry. That piece of code is here, all of it, that implements those requirements. So it's not that much. It's like 62 lines total. But even if you read code on a regular basis, you don't like reading this. This is kind of messy. And mostly, I don't spend my time reading code, but I spend my time figuring out problems. So this is not what I would be looking at when I'm asking, how would I test this? Emily was kind enough to give us an example and something to kind of get started with. So what Emily gave is one unit test that we can run, and it's passing. The one unit test introduces this little method called check item. So kind of like if you look at it, it says there's something called any. It's a string item There's something of 0, which is the sell-in dates, how many days you can still sell it. And there's another 0, which is the value of quality. So they are just boxes that you can fill in. Just like when you're exploring on a user interface level, when you're exploring on an API level, you just basically see boxes that you can fill in. So we have these 3 boxes that we can play with. We know from this one example that if we give the item name any, and the days are 0 and the quality is 0, the quality after we move on by 1 day, which happens here with the update quality method, the value is still 0. So if we start with 0, it ends up with 0. So we have different options on how we could approach this. So again, now think of how would you test this? So I'll go back to showing some more of our requirements, because the basic idea of what boxes we're filling in and what's their meaning, that's not yet telling us much about what would we be testing. So the requirement specification also comes with these business rules of things around how quality and sell by date should work together. So there's all of these different sentences saying things like the quality of an item is never negative. So different people, depending on who I've been working on this problem with, either they read all of these in detail, but after they have either read all of them in detail or selected something, what they need to do is start testing it. So if you just read and plan and wonder, you don't get much of anywhere. Hands-on the software, using the actual application, it's kind of like an external imagination for anyone who is doing exploratory testing. It gives us the chance of learning with the application. So let's take the quality of an item is never negative. Let's try how that one works. So we have this way of playing with the values. So we have the test something, and we have a quality value here, which is the last one here. And it says quality should never be negative. So, you know, let's say -10 sounds like a negative number. What do we expect? There's 2 ways I could be testing this right now. I could be running the test and seeing what it gives me. This is legacy code, so whatever is coming out right now, that is what we have right now in production. Or I could be looking at the specification and thinking, what is the value that I expect? It tells me quality is never negative, so I would probably be expecting that the quality is 0 or something positive, even if I start with an input that is negative. So let's see what it does. I learned that if, right here on the left-hand side, if I give it a -10 in the beginning, it still gives me a -10 in the end. So my expected value of 0 won't work. It will be a -10. Let's see if I run that again. That seems to be right. So again, just, you know, writing down some potential bugs. Quality can be negative. That's against our specification. So again, going back to the specification, there's all sorts of different things. So again, I could take the last line, I could take the first line. Nothing says anything about the order in which I have to deal with them. But it kind of feels like right now I don't really understand this application too well. So maybe the first line here would help me understand it a little bit better. So the first line on this one says that once the sell by date has passed, the quality degrades twice as fast. I don't really want to test this claim as it is, but I do want to understand right now on how things work around this degrading and the idea of getting closer to a degrading day. So if I have another test, which I give a really bad name to right now because I do not want to think about it right now. I still don't even understand the application too well. I want to just understand, what does it mean that the quality degrades? So let's say we have 10 days of selling time left, and the value is, let's say 5, just in case, so that they are not symmetric, because if we use the same values and there's certain confusion about those, it's harder for us to follow. So this makes sense. So what would I expect? So 10 days, it's not very close to the expiry date. Probably it should go down. So if it was 5, maybe it's now, let's say 4. I don't have to fill this in. I could just look at what it gives me. So it seems to be 4. So it goes down by 1 in this case. So now I think I've seen a basic case. So now I'm interested in the claim that I actually saw in the specification. It said, approaching the sell-in date, it degrades twice as fast. Did it have anything to say? No, it was as the date has passed. So date has passed if we are, let's say, on the negative side, and we start with 5. If it degrades twice as fast, I would expect this then to be 3 rather than 4. And again, I can guess whatever, and it seems to be doing all of that. So I can do this kind of like requirement by requirement exploration, look at every single thing that I see and figure out how do I cover the whole specification. But on my test machine here, I also have another way of running this. So I'm just using my keyboard shortcuts here. I'm usually running this with Command-Shift F11 on my Mac. And today, right now, I want to run it with Control-Shift F11, which basically on my machine with my Eclipse runs it under coverage. So under coverage, I have these 3 things that I've tested so far, and I can take a look at gilded rows and see which lines I'm covering. So all of the things that appear as red, they're giving me hints on like, oh, I haven't been there. Anything that is green is I've gone there with all the different routes that the program can identify. I know that there's more routes than both the programs can identify, but this is, you know, a good starting point. Starting point in that sense. And then there's yellow lines where basically I've been on that line, but there's another route that I could also be addressing. So now I have, you know, even more options. Like, I have the specification, I have the code. How do I put these together? How do I actually want to test this? What's my exploratory testing approach? So I wanted to still introduce one more thing on the way we could be doing this. So a lot of times we do these kind of simple tests with these simple unit test style assert things. But I have a thing here called approval tests. And with approval tests, what I can do is just do a little bit less of copy pasting, a little bit more of combinations. So some of the things that I want to do is, you know, just focus on trying out the different values, because this is a very value-driven exercise, input value-driven exercise, and see what kind of things, as per the spec, I get to cover. So to do this, I want to introduce combination approvals. And with combination approvals, I know that my method that I'm using here, that I was using also with the other tests that we were using, or I was showing, I was using this method with 3 inputs. So I'm going to use this 3 functions type of thing. And I'm just going to call the function that we used on the tests. And I just shouldn't write too much, otherwise I will probably make a mistake on what I write. I did probably already make a mistake. Not this. So check item, the first parameter, looking at just it from the line 13 here below. The first one would be items. So many of them, many items I want to introduce, many items. I want to introduce many sell-ins, and I want to introduce many qualities. I also now want to just quick fix this. So where's my keyboard shortcut thing is. gives me a bit of trouble here. Just creating local variables for these. I'll just do these all three at once. And then introduce here that this first one, as I see from below here, it's of a type string. The two others are integers. Just should not type because otherwise I do mistakes always. And for these things, I can introduce then values. Just like I had in the previous tests, I'm just getting to a point where we're able to do the same things as with the previous tests. So if we look at the previous tests, I had values here, a value of any, a value of 0, a value of -10, 10, and a 5. So just collecting these all together. So for qualities, I have -1, 10, and 0. So for qualities, -1, 10, and a 0. For selins, I had 0. Let me see, sorry. Qualities, I had 5, 5, and -10. Sorry, that was in the wrong place. Five and a -10. And I had here these values, and here I had just the value any. So this is basically getting me to a place that already includes all the tests that we did at first. I could have already started with this, but I wanted to show you something that some of you, if you're working with cert-based things, have seen before. So let's run this test. And what I expect now is that I haven't defined any of the asserts. I haven't also cleaned up after my previous play. So what I see here right now, or what we see here right now, is combinations for all of the values that we introduced. So we have the item any with the 10 days and the quality of 5, and we were checking that it became 4. It seems to be here line 3, just about what we were seeing before. Also, we have here the value of quality being 10 first, and the days being days being 10 and quality being -10. It still stays negative on all of the 3 different cases. But also we have this -1 days here where there was 5 and it gets to the 3. So all of this is as we have already looked through the specification. And what I basically then want to do with this one is I want to move them over to the right-hand side, approve them. And now I have a test that I can run that passes with those values. So now I'm in a better place for my really quick exploration of values. So now I can really decide whether I want to go with the specification, if I want to go with the code or whatever I want to do. And I usually have I have a strong preference towards the specification, kind of making sure that every single thing that the specification claims gets checked on. So we've checked 2 cases on sell-in date when it has passed. It degraded twice as fast when it hasn't passed. It was just going down by 1. We saw that the quality of an item was negative, but it's not getting more negative, so it isn't changing. So maybe that's what the specification means. It's definitely a discussion point. Then it starts talking about things like aged brie or sulfurous or different kinds of items. So I want to just introduce those items here. So first, the aged brie. We had a rule saying aged brie increases in quality the older it gets. So as I introduce aged brie into the tests, I expect this test to fail because I haven't yet approved any of the things with aged brie. And it gives me the combination. So now, as an exploratory tester, I can just, look at these. So, okay, I'll give it values of aged brie, and with 10 days, it's not old at all. It's getting a little bit better. It's getting to value of 6. So what about line 7, where we do the same with where it's old? It gets twice as good, so it goes up by 2. Seems to be kind of as per specification. And again, I can read every single line, or I can sample. All of these are choices that I make when I'm testing this application. So I have the basic rule that I was told this works in production. Everyone's been very happy with it, and we are not changing it right now in any way yet. So maybe even if I had a question or a bug that I wanted to report, I can make a note of that. But if it works in production, we can accept that. And even if there was a bug, if there was an API that had that bug, maybe we can't fix that bug without fixing all the things that depend on it. So just accepting what the code gave you now is sort of a safe way of doing things as well, as long as I know that I'm okay with what I want to speak about on the specification side. So again, I can just run this. So next item says that the quality of an item is never more than 50. So, well, I had the values of minuses, but more than 50, it sounds like 50 is something, but more than 50, 51 sounds like more than 50. So maybe I'll put both of these values. And again, I don't have to know exactly what it means beforehand. I can go back and forth between my tests and my specification and my understanding and try to figure out what does it actually mean then that the quality should never be more than 50. So it seems like if I give a quality of 50 for aged brie, it still stays 50. If I give a quality of 51, it stays 51. And if the values of quality go down, they go down by 1, just like for the NES as anything else. And these are still going up from the 50 because they're aged brie. Seems to be that I wouldn't say that the quality can't be more than 50. There's no input validation. I can give values higher, but when I give it a big value, it doesn't seem to be increasing it anymore. So still a point of discussion, but could also be just what we wanted. So I'll just again approve these. And I now have a few more tests that I've created that are now running for me that I can use then for later. So then I have this claim here saying sulfurous is a legendary item and it never has to be sold or it decreases in quality. So I'm really curious on this, like putting this thing called sulfurous. I can't even write, so let's put there sulfurous. That's what the specification says. So I run this, and again, now you need to pay attention with me. I have all these items here that talk about now what do I get if I use sulfurous as an input. And I like to look at the values that are somehow allowed, something that should be okay. So using sulfurous as a value where we have 10 days to sell it and it starts with 5, it goes down, the days goes down by 1, so it ages, and the value of quality goes down by 1. So it doesn't seem like this is working, but this is making me think maybe there's something that I don't know. And going to the code, again, I've done this before, so I've run into this problem before. I can see that my specification is using a shorthand version of the name of the item. So I might want to log a bug against the specification that maybe we want to fix the shorthand because somebody else might be making the same mistake as I do and thinking sulfurous is what the shorthand version is okay. So let's explore and try, like what if we changed it? Do our results change? And now looking at the exact same thing, the value of 10 and 5, the days don't go forward, it's still 10. The quality doesn't change, it's still 5. And it seems to be so for all of the values that I can see here. So again, seems like it works as specified. Also have a thing called backstage passes here. Then it says backstage passes like aged brie increase in quality as sell-in value approaches. And learning something from the previous one, I really want to find the string right from here. So again, the same thing using shorthand. Sorry. and adding that to the list. So we have some more values that we can take a look at for the concert passes now. So I don't know if I have all the different cases here for days. So there's expired days. It says after it was expired or after the concert is gone, the value goes to 0. Looks nice. When there's 10 days and goes to 9 days, the value goes up by 2. So there seems to be okay things in general, but some of the values are clearly still missing in comparison to this whole claim here. So it says quality increases by 2 when there's 10 days or less, we saw that, and by 3 when there's 5 days or less. So we're going to need the 5 days here on the sell-in side. So again, more values into whatever we're exploring. So adding those values, I don't really care how the other ones work, but I could also look at those. I care now mostly about the concert tickets, also that I could hit this. So for the claim of 5 days or less that the value goes up by 3, yeah, on line 61, it seems to be doing that. So again, I can use as much time as I feel I need to verify the results before I accept them, or I can just go with the rule of works in production, it's legacy code. We can't change it anyway without talking to other people who might be depending on it. So right now, you know, on a shallow level at least, I think I have stuff around the specification covered. There's this quality 80 on sulfurous, but I don't really care about that much. But I'm curious on how well am I doing with my exploration with the specification, just running it under code coverage again and seeing how I'm doing. So it seems there's a lot of green right now, but there's some values here that are somehow difficult or different. So I see a value of selling around 11, and I see a value of quality around 50. And I really want to avoid too much thinking right now, because again, I'm mostly kind of like trying to understand how do I even get this under tests. And I can look against the specification or my understanding, anything that I see from here. So for qualities, values around 50. Well, we had over 50, so let's say we put 49 there. And for sell-ins, the value was 11 that was mentioned there. So we had 10, but we didn't have 11. So let's just try these first. Run again our tests, what we have. We can check whichever we feel like checking. Right now, I don't feel like checking any of them. I just go and copy paste and accept my results. Make sure that my tests are running and see how I'm doing against my code right now. So I do not see yellow anymore. So it seems like I have now covered the code as well. So again, all the time I'm exploring, I am looking at how things are. So right now, I think I've covered the specification, I've covered the code, but am I done? I don't think so. There's some of the things that I, for example, know by heart, having done this before. You can also give an input value that would be something of this sort. So with leading zeros, and what happens with that then? With leading zeros, it starts with assuming it is a value of 72. So it's clearly looking at it as something that I did not know that I inputted. And from that interpretation seems to be, at least for any, going down by 1, which is exactly what I had in mind before. So again, you know, I can add all of this here. And again, now I have a few more tests again that I can run. And well, it won't change much of my code coverage, because that isn't the case that actually is in the code. It's more about the assumptions that we make on the system. So this is the demo that I wanted to do with you. And I kind of wanted to show you this and then kind of go back to the idea that I've done this with many people who have never worked with code. And coaching people on doing things like this, it's still the same thought process that we use with user interfaces. We see boxes, we put values in them, we need to somehow identify what we're doing and what we're when do we say we're going to be done. So this exercise is very much around coverage. So I just demoed you basically exploratory unit testing of legacy code. Legacy code is great in the sense that, you know, if it works in some way, even if it's wrong, we can talk about the way it works wrong, but we probably can't easily fix it because somebody might have built assumptions on it. But we can explore on unit test level just as well as any other test levels. This just happens to be a very small and nice exercise to start with. So that's why I wanted to show that to you today. I also showed you how I combined kind of my ideas of the world, kind of things like, oh, maybe the numbers are not just numbers as if we normally think of them. Maybe there's other examples of numbers. We covered the whole specification, but we also covered the code that the specification alone didn't drive us to cover. So we looked at different kinds of criteria of when we would be done. But there would still be more. You know, I've only done this on my own machine. Maybe there's other machines, other environments, other dependencies that we need to test. So environment coverage is definitely something to still look into. Then I usually, when I demo, I don't get to spend so much time on the application. I spend a little bit more on this one today. So I showed a little bit deeper testing, but there's way more that we could explore around this. So somewhere maybe medium between shallow and deep testing is what I was showing today. But the difference is really on how we learn and the control that we ourselves as testers take when we're learning. That's something that I often look at, on how people notice when they learn, or how many times they need to try before they figure something out. Needing to get things at once isn't necessary. You know, trying things 5 times is fine, as long as you keep on actively asking yourself, what am I learning? Why am I doing more of this? Is there any new information that is coming my way? Also, what I showed you is what I would call disposable test automation. We started off with the asserts, where I was actually deleting the tests that I was using just to explore in the beginning. But also towards the end, we just kept all of the values. We went to a format where it was really easy to add values and more test cases. So we ended up also looking at kind of test automation as documentation, which is something that you would have when you're exploring an API or a piece of code. So from my perspective, it's kind of like exploratory testing was this box that I put test automation in, but I work with other people who have a box of test automation and they put exploratory testing inside it. And basically the difference is just that for me, when I explore, my focus is always on assuming that I want to test something different the next time. You know, I don't pay so much attention of the, I can keep these for later on, but I don't mind. It's okay if it gets created there. And a lot of the people that I work with who work from the automation specialist side, they first focus on repeating and then they later add more values so that they can do exactly the same thing that I was just demoing for you. So a lot of times this coaching stuff with real examples, solving real problems happens in a paired format. The way I do it with people face-to-face, but also over internet, is with strong style navigation. So we do this with the thing that whenever somebody has an idea, the other one needs to take the keyboard. So if I have the IDE on my machine and we are doing this exercise with someone who is remote, they will use their words to tell me what happens, and nothing happens unless they speak about it. And the exact same thing, I do this a lot with mobs, groups of people. It just scales into more people contributing to the same problem. And mobs can be really insightful, figuring out the different ways of how would you test this. So this is what I had to show you today. An example of exploratory testing of something. It could be anything. You can take your own application, you can take any piece of code you have on any level, bring together a pair or a group, and make sure that you're helping others see how you would test it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And so if anybody has any questions, there were a few that came in, or not that came in, but that I had. But if anyone else has questions, go ahead and put those into the questions panel now, and we'll get them asked. But Maaret, you were talking about shallow versus deep testing. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, and specifically sort of how you differentiated between shallow and deep testing while you were in the code? Is it simply about just the different way you question the application, or was it more about like the values that you used?
So I would differentiate it, like I usually talk about this idea of kind of like we are learning in layers. I wasn't learning much when I was demoing because I've been doing this with about 50 groups so far. So I was doing things that I've seen before. So I wasn't really peeling any of the layers. So what I mean by shallow and deep testing is how many layers we're peeling. So I was more like introducing layers into semi deeper, like a little bit deeper, but not very deep testing yet. But I could also be doing, like, it depends on how much time I have, like how much am I able to learn and pick up about the application. Everyone else who was watching this, you haven't seen this probably before. And for you, even understanding what the application is about, what are the values, that the middle value is the sell-in and the last value is the quality. You're probably just peeling those layers with a lot of the examples that I'm showing at first. And that would leave you, if you didn't give yourself enough time, it would leave you on a more shallow level in your ability.
Great. So another question was, so typically when people think of exploratory testing, they think, and I think you sort of mentioned this, but they typically think of testing through the UI, or doing functional testing, but that's not what you did. You did exploratory testing, but on the unit test level. And so is that, for someone who is not used to that, that might be a big hurdle. How do you just suggest people try it? Do you think that there is a big hurdle, or is that just sort of a misconception?
So I think there is a bit of a hurdle, but easiest way to get through that hurdle is finding one of your team's programmers and doing it with them. So they might actually be having already ways of doing things like this. Probably they have already some unit tests, and with their guidance, you could just be focusing on the idea of, these are just boxes, we need to put values in them. The values have a meaning, and they have a meaning for the output that we are supposed to be seeing. So I show this from the perspective of code, basically, well, today's exercise in particular, to dispel some of the illusions that you couldn't do it that way. But most of the testing that I do myself as well is on the level of either user interface or a higher level API. I'm just not comfortable waiting for the whole product to be ready before I start testing. So that's why I work on many levels. And finding someone who knows more and works with you is a great way of getting started.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have a technical question. How did you set up diff merge as default a text editor in Eclipse? Actually, that might be something that's good for like a follow-up, unless it's a really quick
Well, I can just answer this.
Sure.
So I didn't actually set it up as default in Eclipse. It is the default that has been set for me for approval tests. So it's part of the setup for approval tests. So approval tests uses this concept of a reporter, where we put, when it fails, it pops up something. It could be a web page, it could be a headless thing, it could be a diff tool, it could be different diff tools depending on what I'm diffing. So that's where it came from. It's part of my setup for running approval tests.
Great. And Somebody else asked, how do you go about promoting mob programming and pair programming in a skeptical environment?
So usually by mentioning it many times, that we wouldn't have this problem if we were mobbing, for example. But the practical way that I usually do things is I ask people to humor me for an hour or an hour and a half and just try it. I might even try to avoid mentioning that we're doing mobbing. I'm just saying we're doing a workshop and working together. Let's try this out. So usually through the good experiences of doing something and having fun together, that's where it catches on. The skeptical environment, they will probably talk to you with more effort than the 1.5 hours that goes into doing it, on trying to talk you out of it. And I know personally myself that when I started mobbing 4 years ago, I would not have believed that I would enjoy it. I actually wrote blog posts that I wouldn't. And after I had done it for a while, I realized I had not only learned to enjoy it, but rewritten my history. And again, remembered that I've been programming since I was 12 or something of that, 12, 14. And I have now 15 languages that I've programmed in. So most of my times goes with the tester identity. I don't work on the level of code. I work with programmers, but I work on the business concepts and value concepts more. But mobbing brought me again back to this idea of I can contribute on that level too. And it rewrote my kind of like history of how I remembered my relationship with code.
So that's an interesting distinction. So you, and I think you've said this a couple of times, you work with programmers and you work with code, and you know how you're comfortable, you understand it, but you're not necessarily programming, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So my main thing that I read with code is I look at pull requests and I understand how many lines are changing. That's much more relevant than what's the contents of it. And I understand what kind of business concepts or feature concepts they're changing. And I pay attention to those, because I work with programmers who already spend all of their time on code. And we really, in my teams, need people who focus more on the value and the risks perspectives. So for me, it's more of a choice of where I use my available kind of like mind space. I have a limited space that I can use. And it's the same with developers. And a lot of times developers end up using their space for code-oriented things. And there's also the other perspective of value in the actual end user running environment. And we will probably be missing many things if we don't look at that. So that's just what I do. So code is a way for transferring that information. If the code and the person disagrees, the code wins always. So that's what I care about the code. But most of my time goes in the idea of we are creating this software for some real people, and someone needs to be caring for those perspectives.
And I really like that too. And the other thing that I'll say is that sounds really complementary, right? So if programmers are focused in one way and you're focused on a complementary way to sort of help test, like you're not covering the same things. You're working in your example, focusing on sort of the business impact and what risks are involved. We had another question, and so some people say that all testing is exploratory. Because testing is about getting new information and exploration is really the only way to get that new information. What is your take on that? Is there testing that is not exploratory, and what would that look like?
So I've been lucky on not having to work on projects where testing isn't exploratory for a long time. But I do remember my history of working in projects where we prepare test cases for 6 months to get ready for 30 days of acceptance testing when the whole software is ready. And while the hands-on testing tries to be exploratory there, the 30 days and learning in layers gives you so many limitations that that's just not exploratory testing in the same way that I think of exploratory testing. So we can have a very limited way of what we can learn while we're testing, and the level of learning available and our ability to react to that learning is what defines how exploratory that testing is for me. So there are setups that I keep on seeing where people are not doing exploratory testing, but I would say all good testing ends up having exploratory aspects to it.
Great. And that looks like all the questions that we have, unless there are any last minute people pressing buttons or typing. Otherwise, I think we'll say thank you very much. And we learned a lot, so thank you, Maaret. And hopefully I'm continuing to pronounce that name, your name, in a reasonable way. But thank you very much for your time. And somebody just said great presentation, and there's thank yous coming in. So we'll call it there. Like I said, this will be available. Everyone will get a email with a link to the video. And thank you very much. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we go?
No, I'm good. Thanks for coming.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.